We're going to be talking about information architecture and migration today. Let me just start with quick introductions. My name's Peter Carson. I'm the president of Envision IT. I'm also a SharePoint MVP and a Microsoft Canada partner seller. My contact information is on the slide here. We're going to be sharing these slides up on our Envision IT site afterwards. So if you want to pull down either the slides or the recording of the session, by all means, those should be up tomorrow sometime. Also on the line, I've got Peter McKenzie, who's our VP Sales and Marketing. His contact info is there as well. He's your prime point of contact if you'd like to follow up on anything that you hear today and how we may be able to help you out in terms of migration from either on-premises SharePoint or other file systems up into Office 365. So let's start with a quick agenda of what we're going to go over today. We're going to start with a brief overview of who Envision IT is, and then we're going to spend about the first half of the session, maybe a little bit longer, talking about information architecture. And this is really the design side of if you're planning to move to SharePoint, whether that's in Office 365 or on premises, what's involved in doing that and how are you going to organize your information to achieve that. You don't want to just sort of lift and move exactly what you've got today. Odds are, it's evolved over a number of years. It may not be structured and organized ideally, and you want to really think about how best you want to take advantage of Office 365 before you move your content over into there. We're going to take you through a couple of case studies of what that looks like, give you some background and context for that. And then we're going to switch gears and talk about migration tools. How do you get your content into Office 365? What does a typical project look like around that? And again, we'll take you through a couple of case studies from that point of view as well. So let's start with a quick overview of Envision IT. We are Office 365 productivity consultants. We've been working in the SharePoint space for more than 10 years. Really, we're a go-to partner for SharePoint websites, intranets, extranets, and collaboration portals. Not all of which you can do in Office 365. Websites are an on-premises only SharePoint, but everything else, whether you're building a corporate intranet for your organization, an extranet to share externally with your partners, or a collaboration space for team sites, projects, etc., all of that can be achieved in Office 365. We're a Microsoft Gold partner and multiple award winner as well. So if we think about within the context of those four main areas of what we focus on, the public websites, intranets, extranets, collaboration portals, we've got a number of services that go along with that. If you've got an existing on-premises SharePoint farm, whether that's 2007, 2010, 2013, we have a health check that we can do around that. We have services around both Office 365 and Azure Cloud, AODA, which is the Accessibility for Ontario's Disability Act, primarily from a public website point of view, but also from an intranet perspective. Upgrades and migrations, obviously, we'll be talking about today. Training is an important piece. If you're going to be launching a new corporate intranet, say, it's not just about building it and they will come. It's about making sure you've got an effective communications plan, change management, and training for all of your staff to make sure that adoption is high and the project is successful. Mobile first adaptive design, this has become important not only for public websites, but even for intranets as well. As people think about bring your own device, I want to use my smartphone, my tablet device to browse the corporate intranet. How do we make sure that that experience is ideal as well? We provide support agreements for ongoing support with your SharePoint solution, solution architecture around not just SharePoint, but how does that integrate with other back-end systems, and workflows and forms from a business process point of view. What I'd like to do now, though, is take a quick poll and just get a sense from the attendees that we have here what your background is and your engagement with SharePoint today. So I'm going to start with which version of SharePoint are you currently using. I'm curious if people are already on Office 365, they're on SharePoint Server 2013 or 2010, or they're still back on Foundations or MOS 2007. So we'll give you a minute just to answer that. And what I'll do is I'll turn the poll around so everybody can get a sense of who's on what. What does that look like? Let's give you about 10 more seconds just to respond to that. If the last few could just pick one or more of those, that would be awesome. Okay. So let me close that and share it back out. So So you can see only 14% using Office 365. So I didn't qualify that. I mean, that could mean Exchange, Link, SharePoint, any of the number of other services that are part of Office 365. But I'm assuming for this context, that's mainly SharePoint focused. About half and half between SharePoint Server 2013 and 2010. Nobody on Foundations, a few folks still on MOS 2007. Actually, one of the case studies we're going to talk about is moving directly from MOS 2007 to Office 365. Same sort of story applies, moving directly from 2010 or 2013 as well. So let me hide that. I've got one more I'd like to do with everybody, which is just getting a sense of how you use SharePoint today. To use it from an internal collaboration point of view, is it more from an intranet or internal web publishing perspective? Do you have an extranet on your SharePoint, or even a public-facing website? So again, I'll give everybody another 20, 30 seconds just to respond to that, and we'll share that back. Okay, let me just close that out and go ahead and share that. So often I see 100% on internal collaborations, 83%. Most people are using it from a team site project collaboration point of view, which is typically how SharePoint starts in an organization. Almost 2/3 using it from an internet perspective and about 1/4 from an extranet. And a good chunk using SharePoint from a public-facing website. So a nice cross-spectrum of how people are using SharePoint today. So let me just hide that. And let's continue on. We're going to dive right into the information architecture part of the discussion. But before I get into the specifics of information architecture, I kind of want to frame that in the general process of doing a SharePoint project. So this is the Envision IT process, moving from envisioning to planning, through building, stabilizing, deploying, ultimately closing and supporting the project. And the elements that we have in the different phases of the project, in the envision phase, we're doing what we call vision and scope. We're gathering high-level requirements. We're thinking about budget, schedule, what that looks like. Meeting with stakeholders, maybe doing card sorting exercises, gaming exercises to understand, what's populating the top from people. If this is, say, an intranet project, why do people come to the intranet? What are the goals of the project? What are we trying to achieve? And that starts to guide out from a planning phase where we go there. Moving into information architecture, which is going to be our main topic for today, but then into wireframes, functional specs, creative designs, the solution architecture. We're actually going to talk more about some of those later phases in our next talk next week when we're talking about branding. We'll discuss the wireframe and the creative design side of things. Once we've moved through the planning phase and we're into the building, actually building out that site architecture. What customizations need to be done? Is there some custom code that needs to be built? Are we keeping it all out of the box? How are we applying branding, security, setting up search? And then moving into the stabilizing phase, doing the QA testing, if we are supporting mobile devices, different browsers, making sure that we've got compatibility from that point of view. Addressing any defects and going through user acceptance testing with your staff. Then we get into the deploying phase where we're actually installing software. The nice thing with Office 365 is there's not a lot to be installed there. I mean, Microsoft is managing and hosting the main SharePoint software for you. There may be some custom components that need to be deployed to that, but that's typically fairly minor. Training, I mentioned, is an important part of the success of a project, and continuing on the UAT side. Closing out the project, just wrapping up any documentation, any recommendations, lessons learned. And often this cycle continues that we then roll back into another envisioning phase. We may start with one element for the organization and then build on that and grow from there. And in the general supporting, whether that's end user support or troubleshooting to support that implementation. Now typically how we break those up, we do a vision and scope consulting that combines both the envisioning and the planning phases, so including the information architecture sections that we're going to be talking about today. The main building, the closing, we're fans of Agile. I won't go into details here now, but really breaking the projects up into small sprints, 2 to 3 week work blocks, and working through that schedule of doing a planning session with the client, doing the builds and the QA all together, and then doing a demo session from there, and then repeating that process through there. And then typically we work just on time and materials from a support point of view. So that's sort of the end-to-end structure of the project, let's talk more about the information architecture side. And what do we actually mean by information architecture? It's really the structure of the site, the content, the knowledge, the documents, the information that you're going to be putting into that site, whether it's a public-facing website, an intranet, an extranet, a collaboration portal. The same due diligence should apply to all of those. You really need to think about, at a high level, what that structure looks like before you start diving into the weeds from there. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have a typical site taxonomy in terms of its structure, the different areas and libraries and lists and such underneath that. We'll go deeper into some examples as we talk through this. Now, one of the things that often comes up as we're talking about information architecture, people have heard the word metadata, but they don't really understand what does that actually mean. And it looks like a confusing statement, the information about information, but that's really what it is. It's not the document contents itself, it's the properties of those documents. So, I mean, the obvious ones, if you think about just documents that you're storing on your file system, who last modified that, when did they do that, what's the title of the document, the description of the document is some of the key metadata that virtually every document has. And just at that level, that can be very important. When we talk about migrations later on, things like when was it last modified and who modified it is actually really important. If you do sort of a manual drag and drop migration into Office 365, what will happen is whoever actually dragged that content in, all of those documents will be tagged that that person last modified them on the date that they migrated them. So you'll lose that. And let's talk a minute about folders versus metadata. So I mean, people traditionally are used to organizing information by folders, and that really comes from the file system legacy that most content is stored on file shares and organized through folders. And often you'll see very deep hierarchies, maybe 10 levels deep of how people have organized that content. And that typically works for the person that's done the organization, but it often doesn't work for whoever's coming in to find that. So if you have a role change, somebody leaves your organization, you've got somebody new taking over that work, it can be a daunting task to understand, those hundreds or thousands of folders and how things have been maybe logically organized from one person's perspective, but maybe not from another person's perspective. I actually want to share an example that we worked with one of our clients, and they had that exact scenario where they had a deep folder structure that they'd set up to organize their intellectual property. So they were an engineering company, and they had literally tens of thousands of patents, both that they held and that competitors held that they wanted to track. So what they did was they had an intellectual property file share, and they kept three main top-level folders. They had one for technology, one for competitor, and one for year that they could categorize their documents into. So they would have different technology folders underneath the technology. We have different competitor companies under there, and then different calendar years underneath the year. So we've got a single document. What they would do is they would actually file that document in multiple places. So they'd say, okay, this patent document applies to technology B, so I'm going to put it in the Tech B folder. And it's got to do with XYZ Incorporated as a company. I'm going to put it in the XYZ folder. And it's for calendar year 2015. Excuse me, so I'll put it in the 2015 folder. So you can see right there, we've actually put the same document into 3 different places, and it just becomes a nightmare when you think about tens of thousands of documents, each of them copied multiple times, just to try and organize them and make them easy to find. It's not an ideal way. If one of those documents gets misfiled in the wrong place, you'll never find it. If you change one of them but forgets to change the other 2, now we've got multiple versions of the truth. And a favorite catchphrase of mine in SharePoint is a single version of the truth. The idea that you place a piece of content or a piece of information in one place, you can reference it and view it in different ways from there, but there is that single version of truth that people work off of. We don't have multiple copies of that document. So if we look at that from a metadata point of view, what we can have is an intellectual property document library, say in SharePoint. We put a document into that, and then we tag it with metadata saying, it has this particular technology on it, it applies to this competitor, and it's based around this particular calendar year. So we have that single document, that single version of the truth, with the additional metadata on there. So we can go much broader than just who last modified the document and when did that happen. We can tag and add our own site columns to that information. So let's have a look at information architecture in Office 365. What does that look like? This is a very simplistic view, but what I've tried to do is just capture at a very high level what does that structure appear like. And at the top, we've got site collections. So a site collection is, as its name implies, a collection of SharePoint sites. It can be as deep as you need it to be from a sub-site point of view, and those sub-sites can have lists and libraries that you put documents and list items into from a content point of view. Site collections also have site columns and content types that we'll talk more about in terms of how we categorize and tag the content that we're putting into those lists and libraries. They also have security groups that you can use to apply permissions to those items. Above the site collection level, we also have the term store, and we'll talk more about that, which is a way to provide a hierarchy of tags that you apply to your content. And that hierarchy, that structure, is something that you can share across all of your sites and across all of your site collections. So it becomes a common central place to maintain that. And we also obviously have our users as well that are coming into Office 365. They exist at the top level as well. Now, when we're mapping things out, a lot of these diagrams that I've been showing you have actually created using MindManager. So it's mapping software that's great for visualizing. So as you're leading an information architecture session, I mean, it provides the ability to go through and build that on the fly. You can actually put it up on the projector and work with a team from that point of view. I've provided the link into MindManager to allow you to dive into that and have a look at that. Now, what I'm going to need to do, I've gone onto a machine that doesn't have MindManager on it. Let me just see. No. So bear with me. I'm just going to do a couple of remote sessions just to get into the office so I can actually show you what that looks like. I actually have to do 2 hops, so I'll just have to hop one more time to get to my Office desktop, and then we can go through this. Actually, I'll need this one anyways because it shows us the ShareGate we're going to be using later. Okay. Let me come back to our session while we're waiting for that to load up. So one of the scenarios we're going to use from a case study point of view is our Envision Shakespeare company. And some of you who may have attended other talks that I've done may be familiar with this. It's a fictional Shakespearean theater company that we've created. You know, Microsoft uses Contoso. We thought we'd do up something different. Now, it contains the complete works of Shakespeare, and that's actually one of the reasons that I chose this as a topic, is Shakespeare works are non-copyright. We're long out of the author's copyright on that. So we're able to load the site up with the complete works. And there's actually a great example within that in terms of architecture and metadata, in terms of how those works interrelate to each other and how that structure works out. So let's come over here. And what I want to do is come into my mind map for that. So I just want to come down to my Shakespeare company site, into my specs, and let's go ahead and open that up. Okay. So what I want to do is just walk you through what that structure looks like. Actually, again, while that's opening, I've actually got a view of it here in the PowerPoint deck. It might be easier just to stay in there. Let's have a look and see how that's coming up. There we go. Oh, looks like we're almost there. There we go. Okay, so if we look at the information architecture for this site, now this is a public-facing site, but the methodology and the techniques that we're going to talk about here today apply equally well, whether this is an intranet, an extranet, or a collaboration portal as well. So we can see the structure of the site. We've got sort of the top level, and the information architecture often drives the navigation structure for the site as well. I'll show you in a minute the actual site, but the About Us, the tickets, the productions, Plan Your Visit, news, works, I mean, those all end up being top-level navigation within the site. And that's a typical scenario that we see, that the structure we're building out for the site, we want to represent in the navigation as well, so people can easily navigate through that. Now, if we think about some of the specific content types that we've got within the site, let's start down with the works themselves. So I click here on the works section. There's 2 main categories of works. So that's a piece of metadata itself right there. And we're talking about the plays or the sonnets that William Shakespeare wrote. Now, within the plays, there's a further hierarchy that we've got history, comedy, and tragedy as the main 3 categories that Shakespeare's works fall into. Now within each of those, we have individual plays, and plays are broken up into acts, and acts are broken up into scenes. So you can see how we start to get a deep hierarchy of the structure through that. And that's what we're looking to map as we're building out this, this MindJet map as our information architecture through here. Now we can see related content in here as well. We've got things like production. So a production would be, we're going to mount a production this year of Romeo and Juliet as a work. So that production relates back to a particular play in here. And then we have performances to say, okay, within that production we're doing of Romeo and Juliet, we're doing 15 performances over the next 2 months on these dates. So performances tie back to productions and back to a particular play, but they also have their own metadata around, well, when are those plays? What's the dates? What's the times that those are occurring on? So we're capturing that information in here. I haven't captured the full level of detail in the IA map here, but that's going to really drive out the metadata that we expose in the SharePoint site. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. If we come over to our browser here for a second. And I want to come to Envision Shakespeare Company. So you can actually come see this site yourself. If you go to HTTPS shakespearedev.envisionit.com, you'll be able to pull that up. We keep an admin page as a login page. So I can actually get in as a content author. And what I want to do is explore some of that metadata that we've got within the site. If I come down here into my site settings, as we're building out the site, I mentioned the site columns and the site content types were things that exist at the top level of the site collection. So let's have a look at site content types for a minute. And you'll see there's a large number of out-of-the-box content types within here. I've actually set up a group, though, to filter it down to say, well, I just want to see the Envision Shakespeare Company content types. What are the specific ones that we created for this particular project as part of the information architecture planning process? And we'll see the different content types that we just talked about. We've got things like a play or a performance or a production, a poem, a scene, as content types within that. And these could represent documents that we load up into SharePoint, or they could represent list items that we're putting into lists. And in this case, most of these items are actually list items, but what we're going to show you applies equally well to documents as well. So let's go in, say, to a particular scene, perhaps. So what are the elements of that? Basically, each of these columns represent a piece of metadata, a way that you're going to categorize and organize that content. So as we talked about, I mean, things like title is an obvious one that everything has. We've got things like last modified for documents as typical things that are within there as well. But we've actually added in our own site columns and content within there as well. So we see here that a particular scene applies to a work. Are we talking about Romeo and Juliet? It has an act number and a scene number associated with it. So you can see metadata has different types that it represents. So it could be text, it could be managed metadata that we'll talk more about, it could be simple yes, no's, it could be rich HTML if we want to put content in there, or just numbers from there. And I can add new site columns, so if I want to extend my content types, add new metadata to that, I can do that either from existing site columns or new site columns. So this is a particular content type that we're looking at here, and content type is really a collection of site columns. So if we come over to, say, the work site column, I can go ahead and edit that. And I can see the details around that column. What is it called? What group does it belong into, so we can easily find it. We've got a lot of properties that we can set through there. Does it allow multiple values within it? How do we want to display it? And this particular item, as I mentioned, is a piece of managed metadata, so it's pointing down in the term store. So we're going to dig deeper into that and explore what that looks like. So let me actually come back up to my site settings here and come into my term store management. So I mentioned the term store exists at the top level of your Office 365 tenant. So it's available to all of the site collections, and it's really a way for you to explain the hierarchy of categorizations around your site. Let me just come down through here. We've got the content types and site columns. So it is a shared service, and it really provides that common hierarchy of classifications. Now it can also be used for navigation as well. I mentioned that the information architecture, the structure of the site that we're building out often gets represented in the navigation as well. A good way to explain that and to provide the navigation is through the term store itself. So if I come into the Shakespeare section of the term store here, we see we have a number of term sets. So things like the works of Shakespeare, I mentioned that they fall into two main categories, whether we're talking about plays or poetry. Poetry just has the individual poems themselves that Shakespeare wrote, but plays are broken up into a deeper hierarchy that we can come down into the comedy, the history, the tragedy, open up the tragedy, come down and see that that's where Romeo and Juliet falls. So we can see how that particular tag fits into the hierarchy of the organization. If you think about your organization, how do you categorize information? If we go back to the intellectual property example, things like the competitors list would be a list of tags within the term store. If you have new competitors that need to be added, you'd update the term store, and then you can tag documents with that particular competitor. And you can choose, part of planning out your information architecture is also the governance model around that. Who gets to change and define what's in here? You may not want to open this up to allow everybody to modify it. You might want to put some controls around that, because it can become a bit of a Wild West, and people start ending up having duplicate terms in there because they're not really thinking about the big picture through there. So you can strike a balance that makes sense. If you want to keep a particular section open, you can actually have it that as people are tagging documents, they can enter in new tags right on the fly as they're entering the tag on the document, and it updates the term store from you. So it's quite flexible from that point of view. So if we look down in the content itself, let's just go down into the site contents for a minute here, and I look at scenes. So these are individual scenes from each of Shakespeare's works. I can see the tagging there, and I can start to drill in from that. So we can see here we've got the title, we've got the act, the scene, and the work that applies to. So rather than organizing this into folders and planning that, okay, people are going to look at it first by work and then by act, certainly that would be the obvious way people would look at it. So I can come in here and say I want to filter it by plays, and we can see the hierarchy there down into tragedy, and pick Romeo and Juliet. And now we just see the scenes for Romeo and Juliet. And maybe I'm only interested in Act 2. From there, I can choose Act 2, and boom, now I've got the acts from that. But I can mix and match that. Maybe I'm looking for opening scenes from Act 2, so Scene 1, Act 2, but not from Romeo and Juliet. I actually want to clear that out, and now I'm seeing first scenes from second acts of all of Shakespeare's works. You can see how you can explore the data in different ways, and it's not predicated on how you decided to organize it from a folder point of view. Now this is from a native SharePoint perspective. Obviously you can provide a different interface for people to come into from there as well. If I come back to the home page of the site, I have the ability, as I mentioned, we use the term store for the navigation as well. I can navigate down through the levels there too. So I can come into plays and say, well, I'm looking at tragedies, and I'm interested in Romeo and Juliet. And here's all the acts and scenes from there. So we can look at that Act 2, Scene 1, and actually see the copy content of that particular scene. So we've actually created a publishing model around that to say, okay, well, let's surface up the metadata here. I can jump from scene to scene if I want to go to Act 2, Scene 2, see the next scene in there, boom, there we go from the information that's in there. So because I've provided a rich information architecture, a rich structure to that content that I've got in SharePoint, I can then present it in a variety of different ways here to the end user. It's a very powerful concept from that point of view. Now the navigation itself, let me just come back quickly. So if we look at the flyout navigation that we have here, that's actually managed through that same term store as well. So if I look at my site settings and term store management again, we can see down at the site collection level here we have site navigation, and there's my navigation structure. It's very easy if I want to move something around to say, well, I want to put the artistic director in a different section of the site. I can actually just move that term, decide where I want to put it, and the site updates appropriately from there. Both the navigation and the structure of the site will then change based on that. So it's a very flexible way to not only set it up initially, to manage and maintain it going forward as well. Let me give you a different example. I want to go into Office 365. So the Shakespeare example that I was showing you was SharePoint 2013 on-premise. We're actually partway through migrating that to Office 365. Actually, next week's session when we get into branding, I'm hoping to have some of the branding together on that and show you what that site looks like in Office 365. But everything I showed you, everything I was doing there applies equally whether we're talking about on-premises SharePoint or Office 365 SharePoint Online. This next example is live up in Office 365, and it illustrates a fairly simple but powerful concept around how we can use the content types and a concept called document sets as well as part of that. So the scenario is a company called CSR Eco Solutions. So they're an organization. What they do is they work with for-profit businesses that are going through, say, an office move or a reconciliation reorganization that needs to remove used office furniture and equipment. They don't want to just send it to the dumpster, to the landfill. That's not great from a corporate social responsibility or an eco point of view. So they find charitable organizations that can make use of that equipment. And basically up on their website, the charities can go in and say, okay, what programs do you have running? What equipment do you have available? And they can basically online shop through that and say, oh, I'd like some of these desks, some of these chairs, maybe some of these computers, storage cabinets, what have you. They place their order through that, and then CSR Eco Solutions manage the logistics to move that stuff out of the business and over to the charity from there, and basically redirect virtually all of the used equipment around that. So very cool business, very interesting concept around that. Now they have a very simple website. It's not in Office 365. It's in fact not in Microsoft at all. It's up in a hosted website provider called Weebly, which is a very simple, create your website based on a template kind of model, which works for them. They're not a big organization. But they wanted an easy way to present the inventory that they had up onto that. So we started off just by collecting the inventory in Office 365. And now what we're doing is actually going to be pushing that onto their website live through there. So I want to introduce a concept called document sets. So I talked about how metadata was better than folders. Document sets kind of merge those together to say, okay, it's like a folder, but you can actually put metadata on the folder itself as well as on the contents within it. So let me explain by jumping into the site to show you what that looks like. Come over here, sign in. Oh, that's the wrong one. Bear with me a sec. Okay, so I'm now in CSR Eco Solutions Office 365 SharePoint site. And we don't have a whole lot in there. Really, it's focused around the management of the program. So program represents one move. So one business is looking to remove their used equipment and distribute it to multiple charities from there. So what we do is we organize each of those moves into a document set. And I can see here I've got my Peter demo set, and I can drill into that. So as I mentioned, it's a folder that I can drop files into, and literally it's as easy as just drag and dropping files into the pane in the browser here to upload those images in there that represent this particular program that we're running. But you can see we've got metadata on the document set itself. So what's the location of the program? Well, this particular one is in Toronto, and we're looking to do the move out on June 29th. So that applies to the folder or the program as a whole, but then each individual item within that has its own metadata as well. So we've got two different content types in here. We've got program items and a program Excel. So there's one Excel that gets populated as a default when we create the document set, and then we drag and drop basically pictures of the items that are going to be available for sale. And that particular content type has things like the item size, the quantity, the value, the weight as metadata on those pictures. Now I can go in item by item, say I want to edit the properties of each of those and set that appropriately. It's actually a much faster way to do that, which is come over to my library tab, click on the quick edit, and it basically turns this document set into almost a spreadsheet that I can just start banging through there and saying, okay, well, we actually got 5 of these, and we don't have 2 of those, we've got 3 of those. I can update that information and update that metadata very easily. So a lot of the concern for people is, well, it's easy to use folders. I just create a folder and I drag a bunch of files in there, and away I go, I'm done. And it's a pain in the butt to drag 100 files in and then go file by file and tag them and put the metadata in. So this is a key part of that, is to say, well, you know what, you can drag 100 pictures in here, and then just switch to the quick edit mode and bang in and put in the appropriate metadata that you need from there. And these items have the ability to actually inherit the metadata of the parent content document set as well. So you can do very complex kind of solutions within there, get quite creative in terms of how all that works together. And what we want to do is, when we're finished here, have the ability to actually push this content out onto their Weebly site. So if we come back here for a second, this is what the plan is around the online ordering form. That we'll actually take all of the information around each of the items, present the image and an ordering form for how many quantity items of each of those they would like, and push that up onto the Weebly site. We've got to do a little bit of custom development for that because we can't anonymously expose the content that we have in Office 365. It doesn't support that. But basically what we're planning on doing is pushing that from 365 into Azure where it's anonymously available, and then updating the Weebly site to display that information from there. What we're doing today right now, if we go to the CSR site, if I come down into the For Charities section, we can actually see some of the programs that they're running there. So if I look at the Calgary, Alberta program, I can see pictures of all the items that they have available, but it's a little bit cumbersome because if I want to order those, we're actually using an Excel online based form. So this is actually going back to Office 365 and pulling up an Excel survey for them to fill in all the information. The goal is to combine that together and provide a nice unified user experience where they see the pictures and the ordering all together through that. And that content will ultimately push back into Office 365 and back into the Excel from there so we can manage the whole process. So that's some background from an information architecture point of view. Obviously, I've kept it fairly high level. I've just used a couple of examples, but you can see how you can use metadata, the term store, site columns, content types to really organize your content in Office 365. Now let's think about how we actually move content into 365. How do we do the migration into 365? Well, the reality is that you pretty much guaranteed you're going to want to use a third-party tool for that. You can't take a SharePoint 2013 content database and just attach it to Office 365. That method doesn't work like it does on-premise. I mentioned you could do a manual migration. You're going to lose all your metadata. Even things like the date last modified and the who modified it, while that may not sound like an important thing, it's actually really valuable. If you're looking at multiple copies of a document and they've named them slightly differently, which is quite common in a file share file folder type of world, how do you know which is the most current one? Well, they all say the same date based on the migration. So you're likely going to want to use a third-party tool around that. There's two main tools that we've used. ShareGate, and I've got the web link there, is a Montreal-based company, and Metalogic's Content Matrix is a US-based company. Both provide rich tools for doing migrations into Office 365. The models are a little different between them. ShareGate's model is not just from a migration point of view, but from an ongoing management of your content perspective. They sell their product on a per-user basis. You can migrate as much content as you want through that user account. Metalogic's is part of a much broader suite of products for SharePoint, but within the Content Matrix product, it's intended more around the initial migration side of things, and it's a metered product where you pay based on the amount of content that you're going to be migrating across. They both have free versions. There's a 30-day unlimited trial version of ShareGate available on their site. Metalogic's, I believe, has a 25 gig migration, so if you have a small migration you want to try it out on, you can certainly do that for free as well. So I encourage you to look at one or both of those tools. You're going to need something like that if you are moving into 365. So let's take you through a case study scenario of what that looks like. So the first one we're going to talk about is a company in Montreal called Media Experts. So they're a top-ranked Canadian-owned agency around media planning and buying. They're purely focused on the Canadian consumer, and when we started working with them, they were running in Office MOS 2007. We started the project back in the fall of 2013, so about a year and a half ago, and initially the project mandate was to migrate them to SharePoint 2013. So we did some test migrations around them, some planning around that. We were looking at licensing costs and infrastructure requirements to get SharePoint 2013 spun up within their environment. And the cloud was certainly gaining a lot of momentum at that point in time. So talked with them about Office 365. They realized that the benefits of cloud outweighed on-premise, that yes, there was some limitations in terms of what you could do in the cloud, but for what they were looking to do, it satisfied 100% of that. So the economics of building their own farm versus paying a subscription for their users shifted fairly easily over to we should be paying a user subscription and keeping our content in Office 365. Now the challenge was that they had about 400 gig of content that they wanted to move from MOS 2007 to Office 365. And at this point in time, there were not migration tools from Microsoft to sort of improve the performance around how that works. Basically, the vendors like Metadata and ShareGate were restricted to using the same programming APIs that we as developers would use to write applications to work against Office 365. The challenge from Microsoft's point of view is, you're trying to hammer as much content into 365 as you can. That can have a negative impact on 365 for other tenants. 365 is a multi-tenant environment. You can have thousands of subscribers all within the same SharePoint farm sharing that same environment. If one of those gets really noisy and starts pushing a lot of content through there, they don't want that to impact the other subscribers that are coming in through there. So they actually do what they call throttling. They restrict how quickly you can call the API and how much you can push through there. So some tricks that we tried, we were talking both with ShareGate and with Metadata around this. We had support cases open with Microsoft. They don't really advertise the throttling side of things. They don't explain how that works or what's going on. So it took us a while just to understand that that was happening and how do we mitigate that. One of the mitigations was we can spin up multiple machines, but even at that point we could still only get several hundred meg per hour. I mean, you should be able to get upwards of close to a gig an hour is what I've seen written as an upper limit on that. We never got quite that far. So for that 400 meg, we were looking, or 400 gig, even at the 1 gig level, if we could get there, we're looking at 400 hours, which is 17 days running around the clock. And the reality is that we're going to get something less than that. Typically, when you're doing a migration, if you're looking to do a complete and full migration from one system to another, you want to be able to achieve that over a weekend. You can say, okay, we're going to do all the testing, UAT, make sure everything's good and ready to go, and then say Friday at 6 p.m. you say, okay, we're locking down your MOS 2007, we're making it read-only, we're migrating over the weekend, we're getting staff in to validate on the Sunday when we're done, and come Monday morning, everybody's up and running on the new system. Well, if it takes you 17 days to do the migration, you're obviously not going to be able to run a project like that. So that raised a big challenge for us. So what was our solution? Well, we actually ran MOS 2007 and Office 365 in parallel. So we did the migration section by section. It took us a little over a month to do the migration. So we didn't work 7/24 on it, obviously, but pretty much all the time there was an area of the site that was under migration. And what we did to mitigate the confusion to the staff was we provided a common branding and navigation in both environments. So some of their site would still be in MOS 2007 and another part would be in Office 365. From their point of view, other than looking at the address on the address bar in the browser, they wouldn't really see that difference. There was a single nav that would flip you between one or the other depending on what section you were going to, and the branding was consistent across that. So we can see back at the opening, I mean, this is their Office 365 look and feel. We're going to talk more about branding next week, but we kept it fairly simple. We applied a color theme on it, a logo. We used the out-of-the-box navigation that came with Office 365. So we kept it fairly simple from that point of view. So at the end of the day, the project was successful. We got them fully moved over to Office 365, and they've retired their MOS 2007 environment. And we used Metadata Content Matrix to do that migration. Now, about 6 months ago, I was out in Redmond for MVP Summit. So I'm a Microsoft MVP. They have us out to meet with the product team and the engineering teams, talk about what's coming and what's new. We were obviously very vocal about the challenges of moving content to Office 365. Other MVPs like Benjamin Nyland, who works for ShareGate, obviously very connected with the product team and very concerned around that. They need a better way to do that. And they started talking about this Office 365 migration API that they were launching. So Ben got connected with the engineering team. I was loosely connected. It's all under NDA. We couldn't talk about it at that point in time. But at Microsoft Ignite last month in Chicago, they publicly announced the Office 365 migration API. So we can talk about it now. ShareGate's done an awesome job of working with the product team. So when they launched, it's still in preview. It's not full general availability. But when they launched and made that available, they actually had their product baked and ready to go with it as well. So they kind of co-launched with Microsoft around that. Actually, Microsoft doesn't have a lot of information or technical background on the migration API itself. Best resource is actually to go to the ShareGate site itself. So Ben's written some great blog articles around what is the Office 365 migration API and how do we use it. Basically, the idea is it uses Azure Storage as a temporary intermediary. So you've got a dedicated farm on the Office 365 side that's not throttled because you don't have anybody other than import jobs running against that. You load all your content up into Azure as fast as your pipe will allow it, and then it streams it from Azure into Office 365 as quickly as that dedicated 365 environment can intake that content. And the idea is we can get up to 30 gig per hour throughput on that. So that's 30 times faster than we're seeing with the traditional way of doing migration through there. So that really opens up opportunities. I mean, if we look at the 400 gig that we needed to migrate for media experts divided by 30 gig per hour, I mean, we're talking about 13, 14 hours to migrate that if we get full throughput. Even if we only get half throughput, we get it done in 30 hours. I mean, we've still got plenty of time to do that from Friday at 6 p.m. to Monday morning at 9 a.m. So we can actually do a weekend migration of a half terabyte type of client up into Office 365. So I encourage you to have a look at the blogs and what that looks like. Let me just pull up the second one here for a minute and just take you through that. There's a great infographic that kind of takes you through the process. Now, you couldn't do this manually yourself, and Ben actually does a good job of explaining what you would do to go through that process. But the reality is there's actually a lot of work that you have to do. You know, you're uploading your content into Azure storage. You're taking a snapshot of the blob storage that's in Azure, and you're creating a migration package. So a number of XML files that describe what's in that Azure storage, and a snapshot of that, and then you're submitting a job to Office 365. So Azure has a timer process it's watching, looking for that, that'll pick it up, and then move that into Office 365. So, I mean, you can do that yourself, but really, again, you want to be using a third-party tool like ShareGate to do that migration. And part of the caveat is that not all of the content will go through this path here. Term store metadata doesn't go through. There's a few other things that don't come through as part of that. The structure of the site itself doesn't get set up through that. So what you can do is use ShareGate. It'll actually put the structure through first, and then what it can put through the API, it'll push through that way, and then the rest will go through traditional methods from there. So you'll end up getting all of your content migrated. Some of it will go through Azure, and some of it will go directly into Office 365. So it's a nice way of doing a hybrid across from that. If we come back to my site over here for a second, let me actually just show you the tool itself. I was actually doing some testing with it last night, just playing around with the Shakespeare site itself to say, okay, can I take the existing on-premise Shakespeare site and move it up into Office 365? There's some things I still need to work out from a custom development point of view of what we've done on that site to get that working, but that's part of my strategy of how do we actually get that up into Office 365. So it's a pretty easy tool. I mean, you basically come through, if I come back to the beginning here, say, you know, where do you want to copy from? Well, I want to copy from my on-premise SharePoint 2013 site. So we can see, you know, I've got a list of all my different sites that I can move from there. Where do I want to go to? Oh, that's not the one. I actually want to use my on-premise. There we go. I can connect to it. I can do the same thing on the destination site. So that's actually our Office 365 site that we're connecting to. And then to decide what I want to copy across from there. So I can actually copy entire sites and subsites if I want to, specific lists and libraries and such from there, or even if there's point content. Maybe I just want to move a certain set of files or folders or what have you across through there. I can pick and choose what that looks like. You know, here we're saying, well, let's take the whole site and copy that across. And you can see they've got speed modes here. So it's set to normal right now. I can actually flip that over to what they call insane mode, which is the Office 365 API. There's some setup that you need to do. There's a storage account you need to configure in Azure to get that wired up. You set those permissions and options into ShareGate, and then it makes use of your Azure subscription to do that. And there are some costs on the Azure side, but it's pretty minimal. I mean, the bandwidth costs don't apply because you're actually just pushing content into the Microsoft Cloud. They don't charge you for that. You're just paying for the storage costs. And really, you're only using that storage for a short period of time while the migration happens, and then you clear out what's in Azure from there. So that's on the Office 365 API point of view. So let's take you through another scenario, which is Envision IT ourselves. So historically, I mean, we've had a SharePoint set of project sites. Actually, that's how we started working with SharePoint over 10 years ago, was using it for our custom .NET development projects that we were running on. So we have both an intranet and an extranet with about 110 gig worth of content. The challenge is we can't move all of it to Office 365 just yet. There's some extranet licensing challenges that we're still working out in terms of how we license extranet users in Office 365. I was actually just out in Redmond meeting with the product team last week. Some very interesting developments there, hoping to share results from there to remove those restrictions in the very near future. So for the time being, though, we want to take the content that's not being shared with our external partners and move that up into Office 365. So this is actually the same scenario that we see with media experts. We're actually running a hybrid SharePoint. We actually see this for a lot of our clients as being a potential solution where maybe they don't want to put all of their content into the cloud. There may be privacy concerns around some of that. How do they do a hybrid where they keep some of it on premise and the bulk of it up in Office 365? So what we did was we used ShareGate to migrate some of the sites across to Office 365, and just like we did with media experts, we have a common nav across both sites. Now, we haven't done the branding on that to make that consistent, but it'll give you a sense of what we're looking at here. So here's our main SharePoint 2013 site. So this is on premises, and then if I come into our product section and our extranet user manager, that's the area that we chose to first move into Office 365. I go ahead and click on that in the navigation, and you can see I'm actually going to envisionit.sharepoint.com. Now we've got a different brand and look and feel on here, but we can navigate around through the site. Now if I want to come back to my home, I'm actually back into on-premises. So you can see how it flips back and forth between the two environments very seamlessly. And as we blend the brand there, it'll be that much more seamless. So again, we'll talk more about that next week as we talk more about the branding side of things. So we're almost out of time here. Let me come back to my slides. I think I'm almost done through there. Yeah, so in terms of other sessions that we're running, so we ran a session last week called The Future Is Now, which is really a background overview on all things Office 365. Kind of took you through soup to nuts, all the different product sets that are in there. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing another session next week, experience branding and navigation, that'll be all around the look and feel. So you've got your content, your information architecture designed, you've migrated content across. What is that going to look like? What's the experience going to be for the people coming through there? So by all means, go to our envisionit.com site /services/events. You'll see the upcoming events from there.